Well, David, can I thank you and can I thank the whole workforce and the management for having us here at Brush Traction. It is fantastic to be here. And look, the most important reason why it's great to be here is these are good jobs at decent wages. And they are the foundations, in my view, for a successful economy. And I want to congratulate you on what you're doing here. I want to congratulate you on an expanding workforce. And I want to congratulate you on being an example of great British manufacturing and great British industry. So let's hear it for everybody at Brush, please. Give yourselves a big round of applause. The point of events like this, and I'll confess this is the first open air one that I've done in this campaign, it's a great day for it, is a chance for you to ask me questions about my plans if I become Prime Minister in 3.5 weeks' time. And you'll have lots of questions and lots of issues, and please feel free to raise them. I'll take a couple of questions from the media folk who are with us at the end. Let me just say a few words myself about the way I see things and the way I think we need to change the country. And look, it starts with what you're doing here at Brush, because look, it seems to me that the key question for our country is what kind of economy are we going to run? Are we going to run an economy based on decent jobs, rewarding the hard work of everybody, giving opportunity to our young people? Or are we going to run an economy where a few people at the top might do okay, but everybody else struggles? My sense of the experience of the last 5 years is it's been 5 years of wages not keeping up with bills and people finding it incredibly hard to make ends meet. Now, you might say, well, can any government do something about that? My answer to you is yes. And let me just, in the few minutes that I've got, say something about what we would do. First of all, we want to reward the hard work of everyone, so we'd raise the minimum wage to £8 an hour. Because I think that if you're going out working all the hours God sends, you should be properly rewarded. Secondly, it needs to be secure jobs, not insecure jobs. And David was very keen to say to me when I arrived that you don't have 0-hour contract jobs here. And he said he'd been asked 6 times this week whether that was the case. And look, the answer is we've got to make sure that people have the regularity and certainty of regular jobs, not 0-hours jobs. So we're going to legislate to say that if you do regular hours, you get a regular contract. Thirdly, the foundation of success for you here and for our country is our young people. I just want to say something about apprenticeships, because you've got great apprenticeships here, and you offer, brilliant work for people. I think we need to do a lot more of that. And so what would we say? We would guarantee every young person who gets the grades an apprenticeship. How would we do that? We'd work with business to give business more control over the money that's spent on training and apprenticeships. And we'd say to any government, about any government contract, any major government contract, if you want a major government contract, you must provide apprenticeships to the next generation. So we want all companies to do what Brush is doing, which is to provide those apprenticeships for our young people. Next thing we do, there'll be people here who've got sons and daughters, or some people who've just come out of university, worried about the burden of debt. We'll reduce the tuition fee from £9,000 to £6,000. But I think we can't end up with our young people going into the world of work with a lifetime of debt. 2 other things I want to mention. One, immigration. Lots of you here will have concerns and questions about immigration. I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to promise what I can't deliver on immigration, but I have changed Labour's approach. 2 things I'd say. One, if you come here, you shouldn't get benefits for the first 2 years. And secondly, we've got to stop migrant labour being used to undercut the wages of local workers. We know it happens, and we know some employers do that, and we've got to stop it happening, and I believe that we can. Last thing I'll say, because it's election time and you're wondering about the promises that politicians make, does it add up? Is it costed? The answer is yes. We published our manifesto yesterday. Everything in our manifesto is paid for. You're not going to get from us making big grand promises that we don't know how we're going to fund. Now, some people will say, well, why don't you make bigger promises? The answer is, but it's got to add up. We're going to cut the deficit every year, and we're going to make sure that our promises add up, and that's what our manifesto did yesterday. Let me now go to questions from all of you, and I think you, David, you want to ask the first question. You get that privilege.
Yeah, Ed, obviously I'm pleased that the Labour government, sorry, almost Labour government,
don't worry,
support HS2.
Yeah.
I mean, this is obviously investment in infrastructure, but it will mean a bigger and better network, which means more rolling stock, so potentially more work for us. What else would a Labour government do in terms of investment in the railway?
Okay, let me answer that. There's a couple of things that I think we need to do. Look, first of all, as we discussed, part of a successful rail industry is having the trained workforce. So we've got to do more in terms of apprenticeships and skills, giving you more control over the money. Secondly, we've got to avoid what happened at Bombardier and what all of you know, which is that we end up doing these procurements and British companies, never mind a level playing field, they end up being disadvantaged. And we can't have that. And by the way, no other country does that. No other country disadvantages its own industry. You've absolutely got to use procurement to say, how can we properly support British industry and British manufacturing? And I'm absolutely convinced that we can do it. And, you know, in a way, it is partly about facing down some of the bureaucrats who say, well, you can't do it. We know Germany does it. We know France does it. We know every other country does it. And it is about supporting a proper industrial policy. So they're the two things that I would say are important. But secondly, we do need to invest also. And we've got to make sure that we invest in our railways and invest in our rolling stock. Let me take some more questions. Who else would like to come in? Thought this might happen. Oh, yeah.
What plans do you have to protect?
We can't just have the management asking questions, but that's fine.
What measures do you intend to put in place to protect the defence budget?
Well, look, it is an important question, and we will make sure we're going to have a strategic defence review if we win the general election, looking at our defence needs and seeking to match our defence needs up against the money that we spend. And it is really important that we do that. And look, my first responsibility as Prime Minister will be to keep our country safe, and we'll do that. We're not going to make, it goes back to my point about promises. I'm not making promises today about the precise things that we're going to do, because I think it's important that those promises add up. But we're going to look, when we get into government, at what our defence needs are and how we can match them up with the amount we invest and the amount we spend. Let's take another question. Yes. We'll get you a microphone. Okay. I just want to say your name, sorry.
I'm Will Necker.
Hi, Will.
Hi.
How long have you worked here, Will?
2 years.
How is it?
Good.
That's the right answer, probably, isn't it?
If you get into power, will you be scrapping the bedroom tax, or do you think it's a good idea?
The answer is yes, we'll scrap the bedroom tax. And it's one of the earliest things that we'll do. And, you know, I think the bedroom tax is one of the most terrible, unfair things that this government has done. And, you know, you've got disabled people, vulnerable people. I don't know whether you know people who've been affected by it. But I think it is a really... And, you know, the other thing is, it's not even achieved its objective. Its objective was supposed to be to get people to move house. But there aren't the houses for people to move into. And so you end up with some of the most vulnerable people in our society being hit. We're going to scrap boardroom tax loopholes and abolish the bedroom tax.
Okay, thanks.
And there's another question just behind you, I think. Is that right?
Will the railways be self-sufficient again, and where the government owned them, and will they go back to those days?
What was your name?
Vince Kidd.
Vince, we do want more public control over the railways, yes, and that was in our manifesto. And, you know, there's this amazing thing about what we do in this country, and it goes back to something I said earlier. So when you have a franchise now, anyone can bid. Take East Coast, which, as people know, was in public hands temporarily because the private sector got fed up with it, and then has gone back into private hands. The only people excluded from bidding for East Coast were the British Public Railway. Everyone else could bid for it. And the nonsense of this is that if you're the French railway or the German railway or the Dutch railway and you're in public hands, you can bid for British railways. But if you're the public British part of that, you can't do it. So, yes, we do want a greater public role in relation to our railways. It's got to be value for money. So we've got to test out the value for money. But personally, I think the idea that you exclude a decent publicly run railway as an opportunity for the future is wrong, and it's not something we'll hold to, and we will have that greater public role. Yep.
Hello, Paul Brooks.
Hi, Paul.
I've worked here for 25 years.
You don't look old enough.
Thank you. I got your flyer through the letterbox. Thank you very much.
So
and
far, so good.
First, you'll recruit 20,000 more nurses and 8,000 more GPs. Do you not think there is a shortage of beds as well? I've got a personal involvement in this recently, unfortunately, that obviously when I was in there was no beds, and they seemed to be trying to fast-track all the patients in there, trying to get them in and get them out. There's nowhere to put them. What would you do about producing extra beds? What
was your experience? I'm not asking for the details, but what was your experience?
Unfortunately, I've lost my sister, and I've also got a very dear friend of mine, not half a mile away from here that's got lymphoma, and he was sat in a chair for between 24 to 48 hours because they've got no beds, and he's been sent home.
Okay, there's three parts to this that I want to answer, and I'll just try and be as brief as I can. Look, the first thing is, why is the pressure increased on our hospitals? You see, David Cameron often says, oh, well, we're coping with, many hundreds of thousands of fewer people. Now, what you might think, well, why is that happening? Is it suddenly that people have got a lot sicker? Well, of course, we've got an ageing population, but the real problem is you can't get to see your GP, so you end up in accident and emergency. Elderly people can't get the care they need at home, so they end up in accident and emergency and in hospital. So the first answer is you've got to improve services in the community. So we've got a guarantee that you'll get to see a GP within 48 hours. That's the first part of solving the crisis of what's happening in our hospitals. The second part is actually ensuring that we can keep elderly people in their homes for longer and get them out of hospital. Because part of the reason why people or yourself couldn't get the beds is you've got elderly people in hospital month after month, sometimes for a year. They're not so sick that they need to be in hospital, but there's nowhere for them to go. Now, we're going to have not just 20,000 more nurses and 8,000 more doctors, but 5,000 more home care workers, which is, if you like, a new arm of the NHS to get people out of hospital, to get elderly people out of hospital and back into their own homes. So that's the first part. Secondly, when you make changes to hospitals, you've got to make sure it's clinically led, not simply financially led. Because otherwise you end up closing hospitals, closing A&Es, and it just massively increases pressure on the system. And thirdly, you've got to put the money in. And I just say this to people here because it is relevant. As I said, politicians make promises at elections. I've shown where our promises are going to be paid for. So I'm open about the fact that we're going to crack down on tax avoidance by the hedge funds. We're going to have a mansion tax on homes above £2 million. We're going to get money from the tobacco companies, and that's £2.5 billion to pay for the doctors, nurses, midwives and care workers. But you're absolutely right. And look, I really worry about the experience that people are having in our NHS. We've got to rescue it, and we will. Let's take another. Yep, gentleman here. We'll just get you a microphone, sir.
Rob Miller. I have a daughter who went to medical school and she qualified as a doctor, which I was very, very proud of. And when she was applying for jobs, she wanted to extend her career into surgery. Well, she tried various places and unfortunately she wasn't doing any good because there was about 5 candidates for each job. And over the dinner table, she said to me, Dad, if I can't do any good here, I'll either go to New Zealand or Australia.
Yeah.
And my exact words to her was, Harriet, pack your bags, bugger off and don't come back. And she's doing a lot better over there.
Right.
I mean, what's happening with the NHS?
Okay. When did that